fresh from finishing his. Do you describe it as an autobiography? What do you describe it as, Doug MacLean?
It's certainly not an autobiography. It's you know what? It's a book about the draft, and it's sort of a lot of
because you
my
were so good at the draft.
Yeah, I excelled at it. The players were good when I picked them. Then they became horse shit. I don't know what happened.
So okay, so listen. It's a Simon and Schuster publication. We have to get that in because they're the same company that did my book. He'll hold the book up. Tell it and how did this process begin?
Has everybody seen that?
Oh, it's beautiful.
You know how it started was I was when I resigned from Sportsnet.
No, you didn't resign from Sportsnet.
When my contract wasn't renewed at Sportsnet, I was sitting home one day and the phone rang, and it was this agent, Brian, the agent.
Brian Wood, yes.
Brian Wood phoned me and said, "Would you be interested in doing a book?" And I had an offer to do a book in PEI about my life story in hockey, so they phoned me and offered me to do this life story book in PEI, this author and company. So they said to me, "We'd like to do a book on your career." And I said, "I'm not really into it." But he said, "Here's the deal. If you give us $60,000, we'll split the profits with you." And I thought, I really don't want to do a book that bad that I'm going to pay $60,000 to have my book written. So anyway, then Brian phoned me and he said Simon and Schuster had contacted him, and somebody at Simon and Schuster had watched Hockey Central at noon and thought, hey, maybe we'd like to do something along like the Moneyball book, the Moneyball baseball book on drafting
Sure.
and analytics and just all things about the draft. And that sort of intrigued me because it wasn't really about me, but it was lots of stories that I, was involved in, but it was all about, the great picks, the bad picks, the funny picks, and the history of the draft. And I did a chapter on analytics. I did a chapter on the Lindros trade, which was fascinating. It was fascinating to really go into depth on the Lindros deal and how it came down and how it happened. And I was in Detroit at the time, and there was 14 offers made for Eric Lindros. And Pierre Paget kept the file of every offer that was made for Lindros, and that's in the book. And it was really a pretty fascinating chapter. So it's sort of lots of things like that. Some funny stories, some good stories, some boring, like the women around the pool in Florida said, "Oh, I can't wait to read your book." And I'm thinking, oh my God, it's going to put you to sleep, lady. So anyway.
So far, you can add me to that list too. This is really interesting.
I know it is. It's terrible.
And you went on so long that I had a chance to look them up. Nikolai Zherdev, Alex Picard, Gilbert Brule. Memories, good or bad?
There's a chapter in there on it's called Nikolai, the Not So Great is a chapter in there. There's a chapter in there on the Pittsburgh model, and that's the Sid draft, which was Brule's draft. And you know what? It's really, Picard was a disaster. I know that. But, the other two guys were unbelievably talented players. Like Nikolai Zherdev scored 27 goals in the NHL for fun. He was a star. He was unbelievable to watch. He was just crazy. And it really was sad. It was a sad, sad story about a kid who left the Ukraine at 14 and 13 and moved to Russia to become a player. And, with the the fourth pick in that draft, our guys loved him. They loved his talent. Brule was an interesting chapter because I've been ripped for 10 years, 20 years, well, 10 years for not taking Kopitar and taking Brule. Well, and you know what I said? And Berkey and I talked about it. Kopitar was not rated in the top 10 on one team's list. Not one. And he went 11th to LA. And what happened was we were going to take Kopitar. And we get to the draft. We were 100% convinced Montreal were taking Brule at 5. We were convinced that. And right at the table, Dorian, who was our chief scout, leaned over and said, "We're taking the goalie." Well, we had Price rated in the second round, as did we had him rated 22nd, but most teams had Price rated in the second round in that draft. And when that happened, it was a shit show. And I made the call to take Brule. And I mean, Brule was the Sid Crosby of the West, guys. People can say what they want about Brule. He was a hell of a player. And it didn't turn out.
No, you can go back and look at drafts and try to tag mistakes on GMs who missed out on, as you say, Kopitar was available, and he was available to you and a lot of other teams, and didn't go till he went. In the Zherdev year, way down the list was Ryan Getzlaf. Now,
and you know what? You're right. We talked long and hard about Ryan Getzlaf. We did, and it was an unbelievable draft. And Paul Castron was a talent sort of guy. Loved talent. He loved Zherdev. But I'm telling you, when Zherdev stepped on the ice in Columbus, Dave, it was scary to watch this guy, how good he was. It really, and it is a sad story. But anyway, that's.
But you, as a manager, so you have a whole staff of people that they spend. Well, now it's the summer as well, but in theory, September to May, evaluating college kids, European kids, junior hockey kids, high school kids. And when does the general manager jump in and say, "I'm going to decide what I want to do"?
Well, if the truth is known, he very seldom jumps in. He really does, because he hasn't seen the players. And the GMs today, and it's gradually changed. Early on, the GMs used to scout. I tried to at least see the first and second round picks, but you're with the big team so much. You're with the minor team so much. You're busy with all the, I was president and GM. If I would see, maybe when I say the first and second round picks, I might see them a couple times. So It's all BS that the GMs are making these calls. They're not making these calls. And what I put in the book about Kopitar, Nick Kyprios asked me one day on his show, what do you think the Kopitar, taking Brule over Kopitar cost you? I said, I'd say it cost me about $30 million personally. Because if I would have taken Kopitar, I'd still be a goddamn GM.
Well, while you were holding up the book, I couldn't see what was behind you. And I thought I never would, because I thought you'd hold up the book for the first 30 minutes of the show. But what's with the Leaf jersey?
It's a joke, because the people I'm staying with at Halifax, he's a big Leafs fan, and when he watches this podcast later, he's gonna get sick when he thinks that I'm a Leaf fan, because I was the biggest Leafs fan in 1967 as a kid, and then I sort of got away from them when I got to the NHL. So no, I'm not a Leafs fan, but I like to see him do well. But I just put it up as a joke. That's all, for my buddy. He'll kill book sales, will it?
Or this podcast.
I want. You know what? Wikipedia describes you as a Canadian sportscaster. How soon they forget, eh? Or you might like them to forget. I don't know.
Yeah, you know what? I spent 24 years in the NHL, and I guess 8 or so in doing TV and radio. I don't know. I sort of thought of it all the way. It was like 33 or 34 years in hockey, because I always thought when I was doing the radio and TV in Toronto, it was still like being in the game. It really was. And you guys know that. You always felt you were part of the game. At least I did,
Well, but people were walking down the street saying, "Good job, Ron," to you. So it was
like that happened. So every time I was in the airport, "Hey, Ron, how you doing? How's grapes?" Say, I'm not Ron, I'm Doug.
I got one of those too. For the first few years of my hockey night career, I was Ken. Hi, Ken. How you doing?
Ken Hodge.
He plays for the Bruins. I'm Dave Hodge. And the first time I interviewed Ken Hodge, I told him that story. And I said, people call me Ken all the time. Does anybody ever call you Dave? He said, nope.
But you know, the worst of all that ever happened to me is when I first got the Florida Panther job. I went to Palm Beach to do a luncheon for I don't know what it was, some luncheon in West Palm. And there was a big crowd there. And I just got named head coach of the Panthers probably 2 days before that. And the guy said, and today we'd like to welcome the new head coach of the Florida Panthers, Denny MacLean. Well, Denny had just been sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary for racketeering or whatever it was. And I thought, holy geez, this is a new one. So anyway.